on Money Talk 1010 AM. It's the Morgan Streetman Show. Morgan and Roxanne Wilder are discussing everything from world, national, and local issues to information from the unknown. And since Morgan's an attorney, there'll probably be a little something from the law. Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Well, it's been too long. We've been missing Morgan Streetman, but you are an attorney by day.
That's right.
And you've had quite a few cases.
I only pretend to be a radio superstar, which is what, that's what I have fun doing. And I got to say, though, y'all, I have a lot of fun trying cases, too. Mm-hmm. And, we don't get to do it as often as we used to, particularly trying cases to a jury. And so, that's what I've been up to. We didn't actually get to the trial yet. That's what's kind of hard to believe. Mm-hmm. Like, Morgan, where you been? We've been doing last-minute court-ordered mediations. We've been doing meetings to look at trial exhibits. We've been doing last-minute depositions. We've been doing all kinds of stuff trying to get ready for a trial that was scheduled to start next Monday. But, of course, as of last Friday, a couple days ago, the case got continued, which is also, this is very common in jury trial type work. So it's kind of a hurry up and wait thing. We're just busting our tails for about a month straight, trying to get everything ready to go, and then kind of find out at the last minute, oh, you know what? We're going to boot this to February now.
You're in a holding pattern.
So anyway, hey, that's life. But I got to say, going through this process, since it's probably been a year since I've tried one. Boy, I remember this is what I love about practicing law, trying cases.
You know what I found out about? All the money that you invest in these cases, and you don't get it back sometimes for years.
Oh,
attorneys don't.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
I'll be honest with you. You might get better odds just going over to the casino than you do as a lawyer. But, we wild men still do it, and women still do it. So, but yeah, it's been a fun few weeks.
I should say by day you're an attorney. By lunchtime, you're a radio host, superstar radio host.
Well, secretly all the time I'm a radio host because I'm always looking at stories and things. That's where my mind wants to go is let's look at what's going on. Let's pull up the Drudge Report. Let's look at Gateway Pundit and see what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And what does everyone want to talk about? If you want to talk with Morgan Streetman, give us a call, 888-404-1010.
Well, it's kind of hard to get back in the swing of things when you've been out of it, but let's go with our segments this week. Let's start again because, it's been a while since we've been back together. And one of the things I wanted to do this week in our Quick Look Back segment is actually cover a story that we have not covered before because this predated the existence of our show. And that is the story of how Bill Clinton sold out U.S. government technology, particularly nuclear missile technology, to China in the 1990s. And I don't know if anybody remembers that, but, it seems to me that we kind of have a short memory on these things. And I was thinking about it this weekend in the context of people saying, that Hillary Clinton is eventually going to be indicted. I think that's doubtful, frankly, but I'm hopeful that occurs. But I think at this point it's pretty much doubtful. But, there are all these folks out there following Q, if you know who QAnon is, that made some news here in Tampa because somebody at the Trump rally about a month ago, had a QAnon hat or shirt on. And it was kind of a deal. And I've run into a couple of folks. In fact, when I was over there in Brevard County, I was talking to one of the deputies who was asking me some questions that indicated that he was a Q follower. And I was kind of chatting with him about it. And the expectation among these Q followers is that the storm is coming. But, of course, this has been the expectation since October of last year when we first started looking into it. But the storm is coming eventually. And just wait. If you just wait a little bit longer, Jeff Sessions is just about to spring into action publicly because privately he's been doing all kinds of stuff. This is the story that they tell. And I don't know that that's true or not, but as I began to think about the Hillary Clinton thing, it took me back to the Clinton server and some stories that we're going to get into a little bit later in the show today. But it also took me back to when Bill and Hillary occupied the White House and what they did with China. And it was a pretty big deal back then. In fact, the Chinese actually referred to Clinton as our man in Washington. Okay. In 1993, Clinton abolished the Coordinated Committee for Multilateral Export Controls, which was basically something that prevented certain items from being exported to certain countries. And so it was something done between the British and the Americans to control nuclear weapons technology. But instead, Bill Clinton decided to permit U.S. companies to export to China high-tech material with military applications that essentially allowed China to leapfrog years of military research and development spending.
In nuclear warfare.
And now we're talking about who's our number one threat. I mean, if you want to listen to the mainstream media, they'll say Russia. And Russia certainly is a threat. But I think if you listen to people that are really well informed, they'll indicate that actually China is the biggest threat to America.
Mm-hmm.
And what Bill Clinton did about 25 years ago allowed that to occur. Now, it's only been 25 years, which sometimes that seems like a long time, and other times it seems like just, a flash in the pan, a very short amount of time. But they allowed them to buy supercomputers that allowed them to build sophisticated nuclear guidance for intercontinental ballistic missiles. They allowed them to buy radiation-hardened microchips. Okay, and all of these efforts enriched U.S. companies, and sad to say, but if you want to look at the news articles at the time, the U.S. executives that were running those companies who may have had side deals with China, which we'll never know about. Okay, and you just wonder, side deals with China. I mean, because do you think it would be possible for Bill and Hillary to have had a side deal with China to allow this? And maybe, because I remember how they left the White House dead broke. But then all of a sudden they were worth a couple $100 million 10 years later with no gainful employment in between, right? So I don't know how that could be, but maybe they had a side deal. You know, it's interesting.
One of the side hustle.
Oh, well, we're going to get into this. This is a common theme with the Democrats, having a side hustle with China. And we're going to talk about that because it isn't just Bill and Hillary Clinton. We're going to cover this a little bit more as we get into the show some more. So I'm going to leave that there. We know that Bill Clinton sold out U.S. nuclear missile technology to China and other technologies, satellite technology and others, in the 90s. And it was a big deal back then, and now everybody's forgotten about it. And we're going to come back to that in this show because we got some more interesting facts to lay on that story, and we're going to flesh that out a little bit. But before we get to that, let's take a minute and just do a little bit of local interest story on some of our local congressional races because, Florida is actually considered to be one of the key battleground states in the upcoming election this year.
It is.
Not just for our Senate race, which apparently appears to be very close between Senator Nelson and Governor Rick Scott, and they're just kind of neck and neck, although it looks like Scott might have the edge, but, I think that one's probably too close to call at this point. But
Nelson will get a lot of support from the media.
He will, absolutely. And I think Nelson is a little bit more media savvy and media friendly, although Governor Scott has really stepped up his game in the last couple of years in terms of media engagement. But I wanted to cover just some of the races in Florida because if you happen to live in one of these areas, in our listening areas, these are actually on the board nationally as being some of the key races that are going to determine whether we have a red wave or a blue wave.
Right.
And everybody's talking about some kind of wave. Wouldn't it be crazy if we didn't have any wave at all? Anyway, I think we'll have either a red wave or a blue wave. But let's have some kind of wave. With all this buildup. Yeah, with all this buildup, let's at least have some color wave. But Florida District 7, which is downtown Orlando, Winter Park, and Sanford, currently, that seat is held by Stephanie Murphy, who's a Democrat, and she's being challenged by Mike Miller, who's a Republican. Florida House 16, which is Wimauma, Bradenton, and Sarasota. Currently, that's Vern Buchanan. Most of us know his name. He's a Republican, but he's being challenged by David Shapiro, who's a Democrat. And all these races are currently considered too close to call. We've got Florida House District 18, which is Fort Pierce, Port St. Lucie, and North Palm Beach. That's currently held by a gentleman named Brian Mast, who's a Republican, and he's being challenged by Lauren Baer, who's a Democrat. Too close to call. Florida House District 26, which covers basically the Everglades, the Big Cypress National Wildlife, and the Keys, is currently Carlos Curbelo, who's actually of Miami, and he's a Republican, but he's being challenged by Debbie Mukersel Powell. We'll just say Debbie Powell. Florida House District 27, which is South Miami, Miami Beach, and Coral Gables, is currently Ileana Ross-Lehtinen. She's a Republican, but she's not running again, which is a pretty big deal. Now the election's between, here's a name you'll remember from the Clinton years, Donna Shalala. Remember Donna Shalala? She's a Democrat, obviously. And Maria Elvira Salazar, she's a Republican. And there's also an independent who's running, although she's not getting a ton of votes, but she's getting some support, and that's Myra Jolie down there. So that's Florida 27. Those are going to be interesting races to all keep your eyes on. And when we come back, we're going to run the Ocasio-Cortez clip that we talked about and tell you a little bit about that. And hey, the clip pretty much speaks for itself. It's a story in and of itself. So we'll run that when we come back on the Morgan Streetman Show. Virtue signalers beware. The Morgan Streetman Show is back. And we were just talking about virtue signaling. And I mean, gosh, there's so much of that in our society nowadays where everybody rushes to be offended about this, that, or the other that a person might say. I remember when it used to be considered a good quality to be able to let things roll off your back.
And a good quality to be able to speak your mind.
Yeah, and accept that.
In a polite way.
Well, and accept that not everybody's always going to agree with you, and that's okay. That's okay. I remember as a kid, I use this on the show quite a bit, and I like it because I remember as a kid, the old phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And we have totally reversed that in this country now. Mm-hmm. Now, you can beat somebody like Antifa with sticks and stones, and they really don't do anything to you. But God forbid you say an offhand word that somebody wants to interpret as offensive. Because then you will literally be hunted down by the mob, tied up to a stake, and burnt at the stake. And I mean that literally. Well, okay, maybe I don't mean it literally, but you know what I mean. Point is, you can't say anything anymore, and it's getting out of control. We got to let people say stupid things and still be able to move on with their lives. Okay, stupid things we don't agree with. And we still should be nice to them. We should still be friendly to them. We shouldn't ostracize them and attack them. We should try to understand that, you know what, they're people just like us, and they may not believe exactly what we believe at this point, but we have the opportunity to change their mind. And you can persuade them. You should be trying to persuade them to your point of view, but instead, all we're doing is attacking and antagonizing. And something that I know is true is that you can't antagonize and persuade at the same time. You just can't do it. If you're too focused on antagonizing or attacking somebody, you're not going to make any progress on changing their mind. And so what's your real goal? Do you really want to change people's minds, or do you just want to attack everybody and have everybody attacking each other? I would like to see us try to change each other's minds on some of these political issues and stop with all the attacks. I think there are certain people who are able to fund some of these wide-scale protests and these wide-scale resistance movements. And I think those people's goal is to have us bogged down in attacking each other. Because, divide and conquer, right? It's very easy to control a population when everybody's focused on ripping each other's throats out, tearing each other apart, like we are today. It's very sad.
I saw a big protest when I was in Chicago.
Oh, yeah?
Mm-hmm. I would say about somewhere between 3,500, 5,000 people.
Wow.
Protesting at the hotels because the hotel workers don't have healthcare coverage from January to March, when, of course, it gets too cold in Chicago. So they were marching up and down and causing quite a bit of disruption for travelers and tourists and business people. So they were accomplishing what they wanted. But it was a very organized protest and good for them. Hopefully they get those benefits.
It's funny you say that. I've been to Chicago 2 or 3 times, and every time I've been there's been a protest. Mm-hmm. it's always around the parks and downtown. It's always there.
Mm-hmm. Well,
that's where it was. Yep, by Millennium.
Always. Yep, by
isn't
Millennium.
That where?
Yeah, that Millennium area.
Mm-hmm.
Our former President Obama got his start as a community organizer. And, Bill Ayers of the Weathermen is up there. He's a domestic terrorist and now somehow by the left a lauded college professor. Rahm Emanuel's there as mayor. It's Protest City. It's Democrat City. Maybe we should just change the name of it. It's not Chicago anymore. It's Democrat City. Hey, it applies. But let's hear from another Democrat, because you're going to have the opportunity real soon to vote for some of these people. And you need to understand that they don't really know what they're talking about. And folks, anybody who says that socialism hasn't been tried, that person hasn't read history. That's the problem. We got a bunch of people out there who don't know what they're talking about, but they sure are quick to spout off their opinions and their thoughts. Let's hear from Alexandria.
In November.
Your platform has called for various new programs, including Medicare for all, housing as a federal right, a federal jobs guarantee, tuition-free public college, canceling all student loan debt. According to nonpartisan and left-leaning studies friendly to your cause, including the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities or the Tax Policy Center, the overall price tag is more than $40 trillion in the next decade. You recently said in an interview that increasing taxes on the very wealthy plus an increased corporate tax rate would make $2 trillion over the next 10 years. So where's the other $38 trillion going to come from?
Well, one of the things that we need to realize when we look at something like Medicare for all would save the American people a very large amount of money. And what we see as well is that these systems are not just pie in the sky. Many of them are accomplished by every modern civilized democracy in the Western world. The United Kingdom has a form of single-payer health care. Canada, France, Germany. What we need to realize is that these investments are better and they are good for our future. These are generational investments so that they're not short-term Band-Aids, but they are really profound decisions about who we want to be as a nation and how we want to act as the wealthiest nation in the history of the world.
Right. No, I get that. But the price tag for everything that you've laid out in your campaign is $40 trillion over the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. I understand that Medicare for all would cost more to some wealthier people and to the government and to taxpayers while also reducing individual health care expenditures. But I'm talking about the overall package. You say it's not pie in the sky, but $40 trillion is quite a bit of money. And the taxes that you talked about raising to pay for this, to pay for your agenda, only count for two. And we're going by left-leaning analysts.
Right. Well, when you look at how our health care works, currently we pay much of these costs go into the private sector. So what we see is, for example, a year ago, I was working downtown in a restaurant. I went around and I asked how many of you folks have health insurance. Not a single person did, because they would have had to have paid $200 a month for a payment for insurance that had an $8,000 deductible. What these represent are lower costs overall for these programs. And additionally, what this is a broader agenda. We do know and we acknowledge that there are political realities. They don't always happen with just the wave of a wand, but we can work to make these things happen. And in fact, when you look at the economic activity that it spurs, for example, if you look at my generation, millennials, the amount of economic activity that we do not engage in, the fact that we delay purchasing homes, that we don't participate in the economy and purchasing cars, et cetera, as fully as possible, is a cost. It is an externality, if you will, of unprecedented amounts of student loan debt.
I'm assuming I'm not going to get an answer for the other $38 trillion.
Oh!
Back and maybe we can go over that, but I do want...
I'm assuming you're not, Jake Tapper. You are not going to get an answer because she doesn't have an answer. Now, this follows on the heels of, she was asked these same questions by Chris Cuomo, remember? Mm-hmm. Going back, I don't know, about 20, 30 days ago. So she's had a little bit of time to prepare for this question the next time it comes around. Still doesn't have an answer, right? Except for that the savings that we're going to achieve by making healthcare a right just amounts to a very large amount of money. Don't worry so much about the $40 trillion that it's going to cost us to make healthcare right.
She's got the $2 trillion covered. So
right,
she's $38 trillion. All
the millennials finally, if we just do this for them, they're finally going to all go out and buy cars and get jobs and participate in the economy finally. They've been holding out on us. All those hardworking millennials, they've just been holding out to get healthcare as a right, and then they're going to jump right in and start doing everything. And by the way, it's not just pie in the sky, as you clearly heard from listening to her. There are just so many. We could just sit here. We could go over her statement the entire rest of the show. Talking about generational investments. This is just nonsense. if you want to try socialism so bad, if you want to try it so bad, go down to Venezuela. They're trying it. In fact, what socialism always leads to is playing out right in front of us down in Venezuela. You've got people with no food to eat. You've got a lot of piracy now on the open seas. You've got a whole nation down there that's essentially starving and falling apart because they finally run out of other people's money to spend. And that's the problem with socialism, isn't it? You always run out of other people's money to spend. Alexandria, and you will too if you are able to convince enough idiots to get on a course with you on this Medicare for All course that's going to cost us $40 trillion over 10 years, like we haven't already destroyed our healthcare system with Obamacare, the quote-unquote Affordable Care Act. I mean, it had to be the biggest joke in the world because it's not affordable and nobody cares. And, yet here we are. So let's keep going down that road, okay? Let's waste more money training people to be navigators, to navigate government bureaucracy so that we can have this socialist utopia that you're talking about. Maybe then the millennials will come out and participate in life. Well, you know what? This is the one country in the world that wasn't socialist largely. She's right. Most of the quote-unquote democracies of Europe are socialist. But you know what? We're different. We were something different. We came out of them because we wanted religious, personal, and economic freedom. Freedom and socialism don't mix. You see, they don't mix, and we should not be in favor of adopting socialism no matter what everybody else is doing. Because we're America, and we're too smart to believe in that stupidity. And you have to be stupid to believe in socialism, because it always results in the same thing, and that's economic distress for all the people. We're coming right back.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. So happy to have Morgan live in studio with us once again. Busy at work, but now we're busy at work here at the radio station and keeping everyone up to date on the things going on in and around locally and also our national issues.
Well, it's good to be back in the swing of things. And as I was getting ready for things, I couldn't help but taking a few swings at the Clintons this weekend as I was prepping and thinking through the show. And, it's interesting because the media really covers up for them. They really, really cover up for them because this story has been known about, and we've talked about it on our show before. And if you remember when Louis Gohmert back in July, Congressman Gohmert was questioning Peter Strzok about the intelligence community inspector general that came to Peter Strzok and said, hey, we found that there is a foreign country that has essentially a program that's on Hillary Clinton's homebrew server, and they're getting real-time copies of all emails to and from hrc@clintonemail.com or whatever her email address was. And, of course, Peter Strzok said, I'll look into that. And they left his office, and he promptly buried that under an entire banker's box of paper or something like that and never brought it up again. Now, of course, when Louis Gohmert asked him about it this summer, he basically said he couldn't really remember them telling that that's what they told him, and he doesn't remember what he did about it. Of course, that wouldn't be anything important, seeing as how we're so focused on, foreign influence and foreign collusion and all these things. I mean, the fact that a foreign government had real-time copies of all of Hillary Clinton's, yoga emails and wedding planning emails and everything else, that apparently is not a big deal to these folks. And the media doesn't seem to care either because they're not making a big deal out of it. But you know what? We know what the country was. It's funny because I originally thought when I heard that, I thought, I bet that's the Israelis. And that's why Gohmert didn't mention it. But it's not. Thank you. I'm glad it's not. Thank you. It is the Chinese. A Chinese state-owned company is the one that actually hacked Hillary Clinton's email server and inserted code that forwarded to the Chinese a copy of every email that Hillary Clinton sent or received while Secretary of State. Now, do you think there might be some important information in some of those emails? I don't know. I sure do. And, when we look at that in the context of what Bill Clinton did to sell out our nuclear secrets to the Chinese communists in the 90s, before we started just calling them China, which happened in the 2000s, They were the Chinese communists back then. And they're still communists today. We just don't use the word anymore. So we're not associating them with actually still being a communist country. And you hear people on the news say, oh, well, they've liberalized, and they're really more of a communistic democracy, really, I think is what we would call them, or social democracy. And they'll say some nonsense like that. No, that is a communist country. It's got a central committee that plans and controls the economy and everything else in the entire country. That's communism.
And you're also not allowed to have religion there.
Yeah. You can't have your own religion. And it's not just, strange religions that we are not familiar with, like this Falun Gong, which nobody wants to stand up for because, we never heard of them before. But you can't be a Christian in China. They're going around shutting down churches. You can't publicly be a Christian. There are a lot of Christians in China.
You can't be Muslim either. You can't be anything.
Right. In theory, in a communist country, the state is God. I mean, they don't have any religion, but the state then occupies the position of the supreme arbiter of authority.
They have rituals, but they don't have any sort of they're not supposed to. Not allowed to.
You mean the communists have rituals, at their meetings and stuff, and who knows what else. But one of the other, because, track where I'm thinking here. Did you remember that it came out about a month ago? Actually, now I guess it's been closer to 2 months ago, that Diane Feinstein, that liberal champion in San Francisco, that she for 20 years had a Chinese communist spy in a central role in her office. His name was Russell Lowe. By the way, he's still walking around free out in San Francisco for some reason. And the media is not covering this. The media is not telling you about this. But she actually had a Chinese spy in her office for more than 20 years, and it was a longtime friend of hers. They described him as her driver. And if you want to look around, there are some allegations that there was an even more personal relationship between Feinstein and Russell Lowe. Of course, we would have no knowledge of whether that would be true or not. But we do know that Diane Feinstein was the mayor of San Francisco back when San Francisco and Shanghai became sister cities, and they became sister cities because of Mayor Feinstein's friendship with the then mayor of Shanghai, Jiang Zemin. If you remember Jiang Zemin, he later became the head of the Chinese Communist Party, right? And he would have Diane Feinstein and her husband, Richard Bloom, over to China. He had him over to stay in Mao Zedong's residence. Oh, the great hero of the great cultural revolution, right? He only killed 40 or 60 million people. Let's have a party in his house. Let's hold him up as somebody who we respect and think was a good person. That's what they do in China. You don't dare insult Mao Zedong in China. Okay, so what do you think Diane Feinstein and her husband were doing hanging out over there in Mao Zedong's palace with Jiang Zemin, having dinner, going on little tours, building relationships, building a friendship? Now, Feinstein has been one of the key people who has been arguing to bring China into the global economy. And now we're going back again about 20 to 25 years when all this was occurring, if you folks remember this was going on. And do you think that Feinstein and her husband may have profited in some way from their association with China? Certainly her husband made major investments in various things and made a lot of money through the Chinese connection. And remembering that the Chinese economy doesn't work via market forces, that it's a planned economy, investments over there probably don't carry the same market risk that they do over here because they actually know which companies are going to be selected for certain contracts and which ones are going to make certain money for certain things. So it'd be pretty easy to pick your investment. But meanwhile, the media, instead of focusing on this extreme national security issue that's going on with Diane Feinstein, with a longtime spy in her office, you've got Hillary Clinton with, her email servers got a back door for the Chinese, and you got Bill Clinton sold our nuclear secrets to the Chinese. But instead of all of that, the media can't stop talking about what were, until yesterday, anonymous accusations brought forward by Diane Feinstein about Judge Brett Kavanaugh.
Two things to mention. You said the mainstream media won't focus on this. I wouldn't mind if they just glossed over it. they're definitely not going to focus. They don't even gloss over
That's
it.
right.
just
Not only are they not focusing on it, they're not mentioning it at all.
And how about Russell Lowe? Do you know what he's doing now?
No, he's been fired from Senator Feinstein's office, and to the best of my understanding and what I've been able to research, he's not been arrested or charged with anything.
He's working for a nonprofit in California dedicated to the issue, I have no idea what this means, of comfort women.
Oh my
What in the
goodness.
world? It's a nonprofit dealing with comfort women. Now, the only thing I associate comfort pets, what does that even mean? I have no idea. I have to look into this a little bit
It's
more,
like
find out what nonprofit that is.
You have those service animals now
Right,
that are
that's what I'm
emotional
thinking.
support dogs.
That's all I could think of.
Right, so emotional support women. Emotional support people. We're gender neutral here. So you can be women or men. And if you emotionally support somebody, we'll find a job for you.
We will.
I tell you what, it's very interesting stuff. I mean, it does seem, you look at that, you look at the Imran Awan issue, where Debbie Wasserman Schultz's IT guy from Pakistan was accused of all kinds of things. And there's all kinds of issues there that really never got clarified. But then the FBI at the end was just kind of like, well, you know what? We've looked into everything and there's nothing to see here. And just go on about your way, Mr. Awan. Have a nice weekend. Have a good day. And nothing happened. Anyway, this Kavanaugh accuser stuff, I'm just sorry it's coming out now after the hearings are over, 35 years after it allegedly happened or whatever. It would have been better to have gotten this out earlier, I think. I think it's sad because I think, Kavanaugh's got a pretty long record of behaving himself. So maybe he did misbehave in high school. He certainly says he didn't. But I would say that nothing after high school has given any indication of that kind of conduct. And he had, I think, 65 people that knew him in high school actually, and I think it was 65 women, actually write a letter for him. And I don't think he asked them to do it. I think they just did it saying, hey, we never observed anything like this from Brett Kavanaugh. He is a gentleman, essentially. He treats women with, the way you should, with politeness, with kindness. And frankly, the way you should treat all people. So
I would have a hard time going back to high school, even and remembering what interactions I had with certain people to write a letter.
Right. Yeah.
Well, she remembered all the details,
right? Except
the locations, the addresses, and the
except some of the important details. Right. Well, I don't know. Well, I guess we're going to hear more about that. She may wind up testifying this week. You've got rhinos like Jeff Flake who have said, that we need to hold up the vote on Kavanaugh until we hear more from her. And, of course, anti-Trump Tennessee Senator Bob Corker also took the same position. So it looks like the vote now isn't going to occur on schedule. And we're going to hold this off and maybe have her come before the Senate or Congress and testify. And I guess we'll see what happens from that. I mean, this should be a fairly exciting week. We're supposed to have Nellie Orr testifying also this week before Congress, and we haven't heard yet whether that's going to be open door or closed door. Certainly, we hope it's going to be open door so we can watch it and enjoy. We also had, this past weekend out in St. Louis was the Gateway Eagle Conference, which is a conference that the Gateway pundit, who is I can't remember if it's Joe Hoft or Jim Hoft, but one of the two Hoft brothers is the Gateway pundit, and his other brother is like a lobbyist in Washington. But the two of them do some great work, and both of them write for the Gateway pundit. And they've taken over Phyllis Schlafly's Eagle Forum, and they're holding now the Gateway Eagle Forum out in St. Louis, and they did that just this past weekend. It's a big conservative get-together, kind of like a CPAC, but maybe a little more conservative than a CPAC. Anyway, they were talking about it, and one of the people who gave a speech there was James O'Keefe of Project Veritas, and he's going to be dropping some videos this week, apparently, of people in the deep state, he calls it, that have said some things that he thinks you're going to find pretty interesting about their motivations and how they do not have any fear of losing their jobs, among many other things, and how they're working against Trump and everything else, President Trump and everything else. So that should be a fairly exciting week for news. We'll certainly keep our eyes and ears peeled and have all that to cover for you when we come back next week. But we're going to go out there. We got some great Sharia stories, but we didn't get to them. So we're going to go out there and talk about the National Solar Observatory when we come back.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Getting ready to go out there. Before we do, Pat George is giving us some history information, a little history lesson on what comfort women are or were. They were women and girls who were forced into sexual slavery by the Imperial Japanese Army. So that's what the Chinese spy, what organization he's working for now, protecting that group.
And
You sounded much better than Alexia.
Is that what Alexa told you?
Yeah.
It sounds like he must be working in some context to undermine the Japanese, either by playing up the fact that they had these comfort women in other countries, when they were Imperial Japan. Because China and Japan are competing for supremacy in Asia.
Sure.
And, of course, China's on the upswing. Japan, unfortunately for it, is kind of on the downtrend, I'd say, population-wise, economically, and other things, although they are still, the second or third largest economy in the world, Japan is. So, or maybe fourth. But anyway, they're still up there. So.
Yes. And before we go out there, though, one other little thing we want to mention before we get to the National Solar Observatory story, let's talk about national weather. National weather reporting specifically. Did you see this guy, Mike Seidel, in the Hurricane Florence video? It's a viral video now because he was standing there. He's a reporter and he was trying to act like the wind was pushing him all over the place. And he's like hunkered down in almost a squatting position.
He's basically doing the monster bash.
Yes. And all of a sudden, you see two teenagers stroll behind him, just walking by completely normally. Nothing's affecting them. No wind.
You got to see this video.
It really does make you wonder what in the world producers send out to their reporters in the field. Okay, make it look worse than what it is. I mean, we know we're not making jokes because of the devastation that Hurricane Florence has caused so far and continues to cause, but with the rains. But I mean, this video is ridiculous.
It's hilarious.
In his defense, though, he was about the size of Don Knotts.
Yeah, and they said, well, he was standing on wet grass trying to keep his balance. I'm sorry. Just watch the video for yourself. He's down pretending like he's withstanding some 110-mile-per-hour winds.
And then look at the grass. It wasn't.
Here go the two fellows just walking past behind him.
They say the Weather Channel said their statement included that he was tired and he was on slippery glass. I can't talk. But all you have to do is ask yourself, what would you do if you were tired reporting news and on slippery grass? Would you move?
Just watch the video. Just watch the video. If your eyes tell you that he's doing that because he's tired and on slippery glass, you need to go to the optometrist, okay? Get your eyes checked. He is faking it. And, did you see the picture of Anderson Cooper? I mean, where, they're in about, ankle deep water or whatever. And then Anderson Cooper somehow is up almost to his chest in water because he's standing in a ditch on the side of the road to get a better shot. His cameraman isn't down in the ditch with him. His cameraman's like, I'm not doing that. I'll just take the shot from up here.
Anderson Cooper was on Kennedy Boulevard a year ago talking about Irma, and you're not going to be able to see these businesses come tomorrow after this hurricane hits.
Yeah.
So
now,
he's always in the thick of it.
I would have trouble being that kind of a reporter. I wouldn't want to do that. To me, there's a lack of candor and trustworthiness in acting like that. And how do you think anybody's ever going to take you seriously when you're embellishing so much?
The nature of news is not to do follow-up and come back and have a scorecard as to what predictions were correct and which weren't when it comes to weather, when it comes to, those types of activities. But it's just, we're thankful that nothing bad happened when Hurricane Irma came through, obviously.
Right. Well,
but it is kind of crazy, those the alarmist sort of attitude that you get.
And I tell you, we get that a lot. And I heard it from all the weather channels, all the various channels that have some weather. I mean, they were really playing up danger. And I think it's because that's probably the best time for viewership for them. They get the most viewers during these types of events, and particularly if they make it seem like it's catastrophic into the world level stuff. And so they play that up, and boy, people just eat it up. They love being in that mode of catastrophe.
I think our newscasters locally did a good job a year ago when they were covering all that.
Did they?
Mm-hmm. For the most part, the majority of them, especially ABC Action News. Yes.
Well, I just remember they did a mandatory evacuation of where I lived near downtown Tampa, like 3 days before the wind even started blowing. It was crazy. It was sunny out. Of course, I refused to leave. I was one of 2 or 3 people, I think, in the entire area who just refused to go.
You want to know about the weather? You watch the guy in the suspenders. That's who you watch.
Oh, yeah. He's good.
Phillips.
Dennis Phillips.
He's good.
He is
That's
good.
who
I
I
like
was referring
Dennis.
to. Yes.
By the way, he's forever young, isn't he? I mean, every time I see him, he looks the same as he's looked for 20 years. I mean, the guy, you got to get whatever his facial treatment is and figure out what that is. Only kidding. Well, hey, we got 2 minutes to cover this, so there's no way we're going to do it true justice. But if you heard this, speaking of weather, this wild story coming out of the National Solar Observatory in Sunspot, New Mexico. And basically, the National Solar Observatory has a big telescope that looks directly at the sun. And we, watch the different patterns that develop in the sunspots and the coronal mass ejections and other things that are going on the sun. And, of course, we're launching other satellites and things to go up and look at the sun. But this right now is one of our main observatories to look at the sun. Well, they were apparently planning that there was going to be some kind of a CME or coronal mass ejection event, and that is basically where a lot of electromagnetic energy gets expelled from the sun and comes towards our Earth. Now, this happens, with some fair regularity, and most of the time Earth's magnetic field deflects everything. But back in the 1800s, there was something called the Carrington event in the mid-1800s. I forget the date exactly, but and that was a really big coronal mass ejection that ended up like blowing up light bulbs and things. I mean, it was a real big deal. If we had the kind of electronic infrastructure and computer infrastructure back then like we do today, it would have essentially destroyed the grid. That's how powerful this ejection was of energy from the sun. So now, right now, we're in basically what's a solar minimum, but they were talking about, hey, we may have one of these coronal mass ejection events, and they shut down the observatory. But what's added some additional fuel to the conspiracy theory fire about this are a couple of things. One, apparently the FBI is the one that shut the observatory down, and they did it by flying in like a rapid reaction force on Black Hawk helicopters, shut down the observatory. We don't have the information whether guns were drawn, but let's assume that, they were there like an assault team shutting this down. They shut down the observatory and, interestingly, the post office. And to this day, it is still shut down. Now, here's what's really fun. If you want to go out there, and I'll tell you the name of it that you can go find it on YouTube. The name of the video is 2 Objects Eclipse Sun on SDO Satellite on 9th. Part 1. And you need to go out there and look at this because now they're saying it's the moon. I don't think it's the moon. The 2 objects are different sizes. The moon shouldn't change size relative to a telescope. But you need to go out there and look at this. 2 objects eclipse sun on SDO satellites on the 9th. Now, did they shut the observatory down to hide these look like alien motherships eclipsing the sun. Now, I'm not saying they're alien motherships, of course. However, I am saying you should go out there and watch the video and read the articles and think about these things. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it.